And then we're going to get into a lot of Steve Kerr, because 10 years to the day, a couple days ago, Steve Kerr completed 10 years with the Golden State Warriors. It's already been a decade.
My God.
It's already been a decade, Shasky.
Shocking, quite honestly. A decade. Damn.
A decade. And we're going to get into that, and I know Steiny and Everett are going to get heavy into it as well. We'll do it on our show, because just trying to think back to when Steve Kerr was hired. Coming off of Mark Jackson, and this fan base, it felt like part of us was divided. Now, you remember the end of the season in Game 7, the Clippers game, where Mark Jackson's wearing all black and Joe Lacob is scowling behind him at courtside looking at Mark Jackson.
Well, he was fighting for his life. And there was so many empty seats on that bench because he had jettisoned Bryce Calabrini to Santa Cruz. Danny Ehrman, of course, tapped all the wiretappings and everything. It was just a mess. And so Mark Jackson, the Warriors lose to the Clippers in 7, and Mark Jackson's gone. And so we're trying to figure out who's going to coach Steph Curry and company. Who's going to coach him? Is it going to be this guy who's never coached before, who had been a GM with the Phoenix Suns and really didn't work out there in Phoenix? Is it going to be Stan Van Gundy, the guy who had took the Orlando Magic to the NBA Finals? Now, from what I remember, Stan Van Gundy wanted a lot of power, wanted to run everything like he did in Detroit. Well, it didn't work out for him in Detroit, and he didn't get the job with the Warriors. Steve Kerr did. And just going back to that, I just remember it's like, interesting. I'm not sure how this is going to work out. What were your thoughts when he got hired? I remember specifically, and I'm going to give him a shout out here. You know, Damon was hosting, and Damon was very high on Mark Jackson for the simple reason that the Warriors were finally playing defense, and he had empowered the Splash Bros, which I totally acknowledge.
Yep.
To me, he's the ultimate level up coach, meaning he leveled the Warriors up to a certain degree. But to level up again, they needed to upgrade. And I go back to that Clipper series against Lob City or whatever they wanted to call themselves. They should have won that series.
Yep.
It was a joke that they didn't win that series. Tie game, 2 minutes to go, Game 7. And they're running ISO offense where it's basically Steph Curry at the mid-block.
Right.
Trying to make things happen.
Yep.
Are you kidding me?
Yep.
And if you contrast that with what they did ball movement-wise the very next season, it's like night and day. The offense completely opened up. It felt like everyone was empowered. I believe, personally, they also upgraded the roster.
Yep.
You know, there were some tweaks that they added to it, and because of the injury to David Lee, and there's a variety of reasons. Steve Kerr was the perfect coach at the perfect time, and I thought he did a great job incorporating specific fundamentals of offense with unbelievable support emotionally, and they went to a completely different level. Also, all those players were ascending into their prime. So, like, it was a convergence of, like, 7 things at one time, almost like a Venn diagram.
You know, Steve Kerr hired May 14th, 2014, and there was the Knicks rumors. The New York Knicks, of course, just had Phil Jackson running things, and it was not going anywhere. But New York was definitely, there was an allure to it.
Yes. It always have an allure.
It always.
I agree
Madison
with
Square
you.
Garden, the New York Knicks, you bring that franchise up. He knew what it was all about. He played with the Bulls. You know, he had a lot of battles with the Knicks. Then the Warriors brass and Joe Lacob and company went to Oklahoma City, where Steve Kerr was broadcasting the game, where Oklahoma City was in the playoffs. And they met with Steve Kerr. And they identified that this was the guy to lead them into the promised land. And Steve Kerr being a California guy, kids are in school out here. It's like, you know what? Let me take that job. And he reached a 5-year, $25 million deal. I remember where I was when it happened, right? When it happened at the other station, working when it happened. It was like, Steve Kerr. But there was some confliction because, as you said, Mark Jackson did impart defense into the Golden State Warriors. Defense. He did empower the Splash Brothers. But there was something amiss, right? First of all, you can't piss off ownership. Well, you can't do that.
Undeniable.
You can't tick off everybody in the company as well.
Before you keep going, the thing that bothered me the most was when I found out I thought he was a fraud on 2 fronts. First, there was this weird extortion story that came out that year. Remember where he was a preacher and then somehow him and, as my dad used to call them, ladies of the night, was trying to extort him.
The overnight dancers?
And then
not the overnight dancers.
Oh, my God.
Not that.
The other part that bugged me way more, and I call it the Terry Donahue, which is, I'm going to run the team, but I'm not going to live locally.
he was living in L.A.
Yeah.
He wasn't local. And so it was like, dude, are you in or are you out?
He did change the culture. He did help change the culture. He did plant the seeds. Now,
I acknowledge all that.
But sometimes you need a guy to take you to the next level. You think Tony Dungy with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, Gruden comes in, they win the Super Bowl. He wins it with Dungy's team, but they needed that extra Now, and I'm not the biggest Gruden fan, but that's an example of just kind of taking the team to the next level. And, kind of like Jim Harbaugh with the 49ers. Singletary and Nolan couldn't get it done with those group of players. Jim Harbaugh comes in, they make a couple shrewd moves, they go to the next level, they come up just short of winning a Super Bowl, but they go to 3 straight NFC championship games. The Mark Jackson era was something, look, it got off to a hot start, right? You get to the second round of the playoffs, Curry all of a sudden becomes a star, but then that last year, just the way it ended, they were going backwards. There was no doubt. They needed to be a little more innovative, knowing that OKC was in that bracket, knowing that San Antonio was still lingering around in the Western Conference.
We Believe is something that feels like a cosmic moment in time for Bay Area fans,
right?
And Warrior fans in particular. I think we really, really underrated how fun that first Mark Jackson playoff run was. Because when we knocked off the Nuggets, I remember being on the edge of my seat in the identical fashion of We Believe. Now, I didn't have the same long wait in between playoff berths and all of the drama and everything of the 17 years. Like there was a lot baked into it. I'm not saying it was greater than We Believe, but you could feel they had a young nucleus that was ascending. Baron Davis and those guys, who knew where it was going to go? But they certainly caught, lightning in a bottle. And I'm not saying it was greater than. I'm just saying it felt different because it felt like, oh my God, you got a 20-year-old Harrison Barnes. You got like a 24-year-old Steph Curry and a 23-year-old Klay Thompson. Like it felt like they were growing something spectacular. Spectacular.
They were. And I remember being at that second round series when they played the San Antonio Spurs. I was a young promo intern. Man, that's 2014. Wow, decade ago. I was a promo intern. Passing out stickers, right?
Who had a better decade, Steve Kerr or Monte Hill?
I think Steve Kerr. Steve Kerr, definitely his bank account. I'm not pocket watching. I'm just well-rounded. But I remember being at the Spurs game when they beat them on Easter Day. Jared Jack has some big-time shots. They win it overtime. And then they lose Game 6. And I remember they lost Game 6 that year to San Antonio at home, a very hard-fought second-round series.
Game 1.
They should have won Game 1, but they bounced back and won Game 2.
I know.
They blew the Game 3.
Would they have a 20-point lead with 4 minutes to go?
Yeah, something crazy.
Ginobili over Bazemore.
I just remember
Richard Jefferson not dunking and missing free throws.
I remember watching that game with Igor, my guy in the front office, and I'm like, yo, we're about to take a 1-0 series lead over the Spurs. And he's like, Tay, don't jinx it.
And you did.
And it was like, oh, wow. They just lost Game 1.
I'm having a meltdown.
I didn't think there was any chance that they would win Game 2. They did. But I remember when they lost Game 6, and Oracle was standing on their feet, waiting for the team to come back out.
It was incredible.
And they gave him a standing ovation. It's like, thank you so very much. And the future is bright. And then the next year was just, it was like, what is going on here? What is going on with the coaching staff?
The whole thing with Bogut and Mark Jackson saying like he was sleeping. It was some quote about him hurting himself sleeping or sneezing. Yeah. And it felt like a backhanded way of disrespecting Bogut. Clearly, Bogut was sensitive.
Yeah, there was something about the team prayer. Bogut was like, look, I'm not trying to do all that. There was some friction there.
Let
me just say that.
Well, then there was the Scalabrini. Was it Scalabrini?
Scalabrini. He jettisoned him to Santa Cruz.
There you go.
And then you had Danny Urban. And then Danny Urban, the coach, had the wiretaps on Mark Jackson.
Oh, my God.
And it was just... if you look at Game 7 of the Clippers, if you just pull it up, Spinoni 11, and you look at Clippers, Warriors, Game 7, and just look at the Warriors bench. There's like 3 empty seats where coaches were supposed to sit. It was a depleted staff.
Well, that was one thing that they said when Kerr got hired. I remember it's like, he is not afraid to have high-level coaches on his staff. Yep. And that was like the shot at Mark Jackson. I do find it interesting that Mark has never gotten another job.
Yeah, something's up with that. Something's up with that. I think
it's how you
after
treat
being
people.
but I think after being fired for a decade, he deserves a job. Like, I'm not saying he's the greatest coach in the world, but I'm watching some of these recycled coaches. I'm like, Mark Jackson's better than that guy. Mark Jackson's better than that guy. I know he was rumored with the Laker job, but I don't think he's getting that. But I get it. You burn bridges in this league. You made something's up. Something's up. Somebody didn't like something about Mark Jackson, but I do think it's been a decade. Maybe he learned. Let bygones be bygones. I see a lot of coaches in the league that don't deserve coaching jobs.
Bonte, I don't disagree, but like when your track record is what it is in terms of disrespecting ownership, that gets out. How you treat people gets out.
It's not the first time a coach is disrespecting.
I agree with you, but I think that there's a tolerance.
Right. Like George Karl had like 400 million jobs.
I think George Karl is one of the great manipulators of all time. I can't stand George Karl.
Oh, he's terrible. You see him on Twitter all the time.
Beating him in that Nuggets series is one of the more satisfying things that's ever happened.
He won Coach of the Year that year, then got fired.
Iguodala in that
George
series.
Karl won Coach of the Year that year, then immediately got fired.
I'll never forget in that series that when they knocked off the Nuggets, Rocco would say, the second Iggy sits down and he gets back up, the old knees aren't the same, because he was their best player that year, and he was 100% correct.
Yep. And then they also, George Karl blames Iguodala would be a secret agent, all that stuff. All that, and he says stuff.
George Karl, put the phone down, George Karl.
Well, allegedly, they were going after Steph's ankles in that series, too. The Nuggets, you remember that whole thing?
Was that Kenneth Fareed?
I think
that
it was.
Manimal. Yeah, that was Manimal, Iguodala, Andre Miller.
Allegedly.
Andre Miller, he was on that team. But then they fired Mark Jackson. And then they hire Steve Kerr May 14th, 2014. 5-year, $25 million deal. Remember, he coached the Summer League team. And I'm thinking, how's this going to look? He's never coached before. And the experiment in Phoenix when he was running the team, and he had to riff with D'Antoni, it didn't work out at all. Did not work out whatsoever.
Was he the one that traded for Shaq?
Traded for Shaq.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure what went down with that, but it was a weird fit considering how D'Antoni wants to play, where Shaq was at that stage of his career. But right away, you see the Warriors come out, and they start 19-2 with Steve Kerr. I think people forget that. Right off the bat, first 21 games, he goes 19-2. 19-2.
That team was so much fun.
I mean, think about that. 19-2. He became the first coach to start his career with the 19-2 record. They won 14 straight games during that stretch. And they go on to win 67 games. 67.
At the time, was that the franchise record?
That was at the time.